My greatest revelation as a father was about a year or two after my twins were born. We went to a birthday party my daughter was invited to. It was at a picnic area somewhere outside in the summer. I had been a parent long enough to think to myself, you know what? I always thought I didn't like kids, but I really do like kids. I enjoyed hanging out with them and doing stuff. After 15 minutes at this birthday party, I realized I don't like kids. I just like my kids. This is Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Welcome to the podcast.
I love my own kids, and there's very few kids outside of them that I could give a shit about.
Yeah. I mean, some of my kids' friends are nice, and I wish them well, but I don't need I don't need to spend any time with them.
I remember one time I woke up hungover in the fraternity. I did that more than one time, but there was one
I
time.
remember that one time.
Yeah, and I woke up and I was 20. I remember that. And something, I don't know what made it happen. I was just like, holy fuck. And then I was like, huh. When my dad was this age, he had two kids. And I
Oh
was
yeah.
like, holy shit. Maybe I should have been a little nicer to him. Like, because there's like that understanding of that age and what you wanted to do, the freedom and then all the responsibility. And I hadn't even become a parent yet, and all those responsibilities. So in hindsight, down the road when I first became a parent, which was older than most, I would say, it all started to come together. And my dad and I are funny because we look exactly alike, we sound exactly alike. I could tell some inappropriate stories about that. But we could not be more different personality wise, and that's okay. But there were times where we'd had some rough times because I felt at certain parts of my life that I was the opposite of my dad, and it was sometimes very difficult to get along with him. And we're at a point now where we're friends, and we don't talk a whole lot, but whenever we do, it picks right up where last left off, which is usually about sports, but that's okay.
It's so funny because I imagine this is one of the reasons that we became friends or became such good friends was I think we were in a similar situation because although I think my dad was 21 when I was born, and then my brother was born 3 years later, and my recollection of my dad, who of course listens to this podcast religiously, so I'm careful what I say, but I mean he was angry a lot. And I thought about that. I had the same kind of revelation, except not when I was 20. But I thought once, when I was 40 years old, I thought, holy hell, we just had two babies just born, and I was 20 when my dad was 40, or I was 19, I guess. And it occurred to me, I thought, no wonder he was so fucking angry. If I had had kids when my dad had kids, I would have been a raging asshole, and I would not have had. I don't think I would have enjoyed the experience nearly as much as I have with my own kids, and I certainly wouldn't have had the patience I know I've had with my kids. So yeah, the timing of becoming a parent is definitely a huge factor, and I can relate to exactly what you're saying.
And one of the lines that I will always remember, you said it first and you said it many times after, is your dad and my dad should hang out.
Yeah, they should go bowling, right? Isn't that the
They should
line
go
that they,
bowling. That's what it
right?
was.
That's
Yeah.
Breakfast Club. That's what that is.
And then, yeah, once you become a parent, like, I mean, I know it's a cliche, but I remember every moment leading up to the birth of my daughter, who was my first child, at the hospital. And I mean, we had a high risk doctor, and a lot of it was because my now ex-wife was a doctor of the hospital, so she got the utmost care. But it turned out it was really good because I mean, Kaylin had some complications coming out, and we had a doctor who was used to all that stuff, but all that stuff was so fucking stressful. And then, and again, I think this is also probably a cliche, but I remember getting in the car, leaving a day or two afterwards, and it's like, holy shit, what do I do now? Like it's like
Yeah.
no one, like there is no instruction manual.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, there's certainly books out these days that try to tell you stuff, but but it was just, it's obviously really important to have a good partner to go through it all with, and I did. But I always like to joke, it was more so on the kid's mother than on me, but my three kids are all 5 years apart. And we always joked that it took that long uh, for us to forget about how painful, the earliest days at birth are, birth itself, and then, the kids at such a young age. And yeah, we didn't have the fortune of having twins like you did.
Yeah, we had a very specific plan laid out. We actually had there was difficulty having a kid initially, and we never went through in vitro or any of the those kind of things. But it took us a while. It's one of the reasons that I was it wasn't until I was 36 that my daughter was born. And then we did we were going to wait a bit, but we did plan to have another kid. And I had a very two cars, two kids plan all laid out in my head. This is how things were going to go forward. And I have my wife had to go to the first ultrasound with her second pregnancy by herself. I had a meeting. I was representing a union at the time. It was a very high profile, high potentially problem meeting that I had to attend. And this was the first one, and she was feeling fine. And she said, just go to your meeting. If anything happens, I'll let you know. But, we have another ultrasound coming up. It's no big deal. The first one, there's barely anything to see, kind of stuff. So I said, good. I said, all right, do that. And, just let me know, or I'll give you a call when I'm done with my meeting. So I left my meeting. I called her. She was at home. She'd already done everything. She said, hey, if you get a chance, come home. I'll tell you what happened. So this was in the morning. I drove, instead of going to the office, I went to home first. And I walked in the door. I walked into the kitchen. I was like, hey, Dawn, I yelled her name. She wasn't anywhere around. And as I walked into the kitchen, there were those grainy ultrasound photographs that they print out. And they were sitting on the counter, or it was like a string of them, like a sheet of them. And I picked up the sheet and realized, there were like 4 pictures on it. And I stared at it, and I've never I've been to ultrasounds. I never know what I'm looking at anyway. But I was like, what? And then I realized that it said A and B, and then below there was a picture of 2. And I went, what the fuck? And all of a sudden, from around the corner in the dining room where Dawn had been hiding when she heard me come in, she burst out laughing. And I said, what the hell? What is this? And she goes, twins. And she just had this smile plastered on her face. She was laughing her ass off at me, but you could tell she was nervous as hell. She was really, really worried about it. And oh my God, it was the craziest thing. But that's how she told me we were having twins. She just left a picture that I had to try to interpret on the counter. Like I said, we had a 2-kid plan, and it all blew up after a single ultrasound.
I loved being a parent so much that I went ahead and married into a second family that had 3 kids.
That's a lot of kids, man.
It is. It's very Brady Bunch-esque, because there's 6 total, 3 boys, 3 girls. And it's weird because I don't think I've in my life known this many fraternal twins. Like, we have boy-girl fraternal twins.
Right.
And then my wife's brother has boy-girl fraternal twins.
Oh, no kidding.
And then the kids that live across the street from us that we take back and forth to school right now, boy-girl fraternal twins.
No kidding. It's like when you buy a car and then all of a sudden you see that model car everywhere you go. It's the same thing. I see twins everywhere now.
That's pretty funny.
I always say having twins is a sociology experiment because you really have the whole nature versus nurture thing going on. And when you look at a pair of kids like my boys, and they're not identical twins, so their genetics aren't exactly the same, but they're closer than most people. And they obviously have the same environment that they were raised in. And it is truly amazing how completely different they are as people, and always have been ever since. I mean, since they were showing a personality at a year old, they were different from each other. I still find it entertaining as hell. You know, even as recently as last night, they were leaving for like a 9 o'clock soccer game, some indoor game they were playing, and just listening to them talk, you know, they couldn't be any more different from each other. And I know you had a daughter first. Your oldest is a girl, and that, you know, I had no experience with girls growing up in terms of family because it was just me and my brother. You know, no sisters, no female cousins, no, you know, until I got to school and interacted with people at school, I didn't have any dealings with any females other than my own mother. I was scared to death when at the birth we found out it was a girl because we didn't find out ahead of time. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do with a daughter? I don't have any idea how a daughter is supposed to be raised. And it's the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm telling you.
My daughter went back and forth between being a daddy's girl, and then by the time high school and when she went off to college, her and her mom became truly best friends and still are to this day. And I'm jealous of, in a good way, I'm jealous of that, the closeness that they've had over the years. And then with the boys, I've been fortunate, like Eli's is both my kids so far, the two in college, have gone local. So my daughter went to UNC and my son goes to NC State. We try to see each other still once a week, which is cool for them to want to hang out with their dad at all when they're in
Yeah.
college. Because I'm not sure I would have invited my dad over for lunch during college. But no offense, Dad, if you ever listen to this. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I always go back to, I guess, just a golden rule in general is try to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And when
Yeah.
I've tried to do that with my dad and with my mom, it was a different time. I mean, my mom was stay-at-home mom, and I think that's sometimes not given the credit that it's due, but at times it's got to be boring as fuck just to be home. And
Yeah. Yeah. Not that it's easy, but it's
no, not that it's
can be
easy, but
boring.
yeah, and my dad worked all the way through, but I can't remember games that they didn't go to. Like I played sports all the way up through high school, and they were always there from my recollection. And knowing, with my sister played sports as well, and I have no idea how they balanced all that stuff because it can be, I guess, just adding one extra kid can certainly complicate it, but it becomes complicated as hell to get to all these different events that our kids have or have had over the years. And I don't know, and I'm glad that I've been able to be there for so many of those. But it like I don't know, just complicated shit, man.
Yeah.
Not that
Well,
I'm telling any parent anything they don't already know. This isn't
right.
like a
Right.
parent advice show.
That would be a horrible idea. Although, from everything I know of your kids, and you know, it's weird that I've never met any of your children. I think you saw Anna when she was about a year old, maybe. I think you came out to visit. I think we had a big anniversary party, and it was practically right after she was born. So you've never met, you know, Anna as Anna, and certainly haven't met the boys at all. But I think it seems like we did a pretty good job. But that concept of going to, you know, all the sports events and all those kind of things, you know, my recollection is my parents didn't go to everything, and that's because my dad was working his ass off, and you know, to a great degree, my mom just had other stuff to do because she wasn't she worked as well. So you know, we were latchkey kids, my brother and I, and we would come home from school, get off the bus. You know, we lived for a big chunk of my, you know, grade school through junior high. We lived in an apartment. We'd go to the apartment, let ourselves in, and basically then just go out and run wild. And you know, my folks would come home from work, and they didn't really know where we were until we came home. So once I started competing in sports, I would come home on, you know, the activity bus or get a ride home from somebody. They came to some games, but for a big chunk of time when I was in high school, my dad actually worked in a different town than where I was going to school, so it was just hard for him to do those things. But it also wasn't expected, I don't think, in the same way that now, you know, there's a. We just published an article that I wrote for the blog just prior to this episode dropping, and it is about the concept of helicopter parenting. And you know, these days, particularly when you see the generation after us, the millennials and how they hover over their kids. I feel like I did a lot of that compared to my parents, and the generations of parents after us, it's even worse. You might as well chip your kid like you do with a dog that you adopt. And, I mean, they know they're always within 5 feet, it seems like, of their kids. And I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. I don't necessarily think the way I did things was the perfect way to do it either, because I feel like you and I, by the time we hit college, we were pretty independent because, like I said, I'd get home from school and I still wouldn't see my folks for another 2 or 3 hours. And then we'd get together for dinner and, hang out as a family after that. But they didn't really know or even seem, to think that they needed to know where we were.
Yeah, and I think that's a big difference, not only into college, but I know you and I have talked about this just in general, not in prep for the podcast, because God knows we don't do that. But no, even like maybe like junior high school, there was a delicatessen not too well, like probably 2 or 3 miles from my house when I was growing up. And we used to walk there most days. And it was on a busy 2-lane highway. And I'd walk there with my buddies and we'd be gone there all day. And we'd go
Yeah.
to, there's woods where we'd hang out near a creek and all this other stuff. But I remember specifically that, like, and we'd hang out at that store. The owner must have been super cool because I'm sure we were not always well behaved. And that was miles from my house. That was in a place where strangers would be going by all the time. As a gas station, people would come in like a normal, it's like a convenience store setup, but it was called a deli. Dixie Deli. I remember the name of that one specifically. And as long as I was home by night,
Yeah.
no one raised a concern, and we didn't have cell phones. I mean, we didn't have any way of checking in other than, like you said, like a payphone. We might pick up the phone and call home. If we did that these days, I swear we'd probably be arrested.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. I didn't think about it, but similarly, when I was a kid, I'm thinking that this was right around the time I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. So fifth grade, sixth grade. We lived in an apartment on the top of a hill when I lived in West Virginia. And literally, like, to get, like, the bus had to go up this really steep hill and wind around to get to this apartment complex where I lived. And on the backside of the hill, there was a street that went down, and there were homes that, maybe 2 or 3 streets worth of homes as you went through. And then it just ended in forest. It was just woods. And I would, on a Saturday morning, I would leave my house by myself with $1 in my pocket or something like that. And I would walk down the backside past all the houses and into the woods. And I would walk like a mile or two through the woods. There was a path, but through the woods downhill to the town that basically was at the bottom of the hill. And there was a drugstore there that sold comic books. And I would take my money, I would walk down there, I would buy a comic book or two, or at that time I probably could buy 3 or 4 with $1. And I'd get them, I'd walk back up through the woods. Sometimes I would just stop in the woods, like on, a fallen tree or something. I would sit down and I would read my comics completely by myself and eventually make my way home. I'd be gone for, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours. My parents had no fucking idea where I was. They had no idea. I'm not sure they knew I even did that. But it wasn't an alarm for them or anything. Even if they'd known, I don't think they would have said, don't do it, or we're going with you or anything like that. So I'd just disappear for 3 hours on a Saturday morning in the woods. I mean, like you said, at this point, someone would be calling the Department of Children and Family Services on me.
Yep. And I was the same way. I mean, I can't even think of how long we were gone. And it was very much that get your ass outside and do something,
Yeah,
leave us
yeah.
alone.
We don't want to see you until dinner is basically what it came down to. And I think, and this is kind of what, my essay for the blog is, I think there's a lot of good that came out of that in terms of developing children into adults who were independent, were kind of willing or able to adapt and adjust and make decisions on the fly because there was no one to turn to say, hey, this is what you need to do next. I'm sure there are, you know, plenty of horror stories about kids who did what I did and fell and hurt themselves and nobody knew where they were for hours. But the truth is most of that is just scare tactic bullshit. And, you know, in my household, as the kids were growing up, you know, we let the kids out in the neighborhood. I mean, we said, hey, you got to stay in the neighborhood, but we never really defined what the neighborhood was. Is we have, you know, two major cross streets that are near us, and they knew they weren't really supposed to cross those without, you know, letting us know what they were going to do. But my kids would ride their bikes all over the place and walk. You know, they knew of friends who were within 3/4 of a mile away, and we would just let them go and do that. And I had neighbors with kids roughly the same age that their kids were not allowed to leave their yard. I mean, they might as well have had that invisible fence up because you'd see them come to the edge, like by the sidewalk, and just stop, and they wouldn't go any further than that. And they were like 7 or 8 years old. And I always thought, well, I don't think that's a good idea. I think that raises kids that are completely afraid of anything that's not exactly like what they know, you know, in their own house.
I think this will be where we start crossing into sounding like grumpy old men complaining about the kids these days. But because the other thing that we would do is if we weren't out playing, I mean, we could watch TV, and I know we did at night, but during the day and stuff, all I would do is read books, and I'd read a shit ton of books. And then this is my version of video games. I had these there, I think one way to people might know what I'm talking about is these like Stratomatic type sports games.
Sure, sure.
And I would play those for hours at a time and write down the results. And I'm not saying that was worthwhile, but we didn't have video games.
Yeah.
We didn't have, and we got video games in college, and we were super excited about it. So I remember, and the Nintendo, whatever the NES, the 64, or whatever it was, and we'd play football and stuff like that. So it's not like we didn't like video games. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
We just didn't have them. But the thing that there's something about like you and I write a blog every week. And I'm not saying we're writing at the highest level, but a lot of it is like you learn to write from reading. And
Yep.
I'm not 100% sure kids are reading at the same level. AI is going to take away a lot of the need for this stuff. Unfortunately, you know, there's always this angst. Like two of my kids are in college. My third is fast approaching. We know where he's going to be applying. And there's all these questions all the time. And I work in higher ed about what major, do you go into? And it's not that it doesn't matter, because it certainly does, but it's all about still learning critical life skills like being able to write and
Mhm.
communicate. And if you do that stuff, that's usually going to get you in the door. And if you have a solid basis from there, you can figure it out. Like I happened almost by accident. You had a plan and you went into law and have been there your whole life. I happened
Yeah,
upon
rub that
like
in.
my career. Yeah.
Fucking
I
plan.
have happened upon my career in higher ed, and all the sort of liberal arts skills that I learned continue to apply to this day. Like I'm stunned at some of my coworkers' inability to write
Yeah.
coherent emails. So
Yeah, one of the things that I guess if I'm not sure this is the appropriate use of the word, but I'm a little disappointed with my kids is they don't read the way I read at the same age. My kids, all three of my kids are great students. They write well, I think, for their grade level, particularly in relation to other kids and how I've seen they write on occasion. But they don't read to the same extent. And I've tried, I read to them. One of the things I did religiously when they were little was read to them every night before bed. And I probably didn't stop doing that for Anna until she was, 12 years old, probably. And for the boys, it was probably a little bit younger, but that I felt that was really important. And I was hoping it was instilling them a love of reading and stories. And I think reading fiction is just as important as reading nonfiction for the reasons you pointed out. And they don't read as much as I wish they did. And that does worry me in terms of communication and those kind of skills. But on the other hand, the school system they're in, Joliet township has an amazing public school system. And if you're a college oriented kid, they do a great job of making you read and doing things to hopefully create those same skills. But I do see less and less of that, and that does worry me as well. Just you feel like you're just careening towards the plot of the movie Idiocracy. Everything's going to be on a screen in front of you, and everybody's going to be a moron.
Yep. And I did the same thing with reading. It was one of the nightly rituals that I look forward to the most, and all the same reasons that you did. And I guess last thing is, especially, I don't know when we learned it, but this whole idea of context, like there's TikToks out there still, and you can make a convincing argument for just about anything, and you can cite so-called facts. And the one thing that I always push back and always did with my kids. So we're driving home one time from Sunday school for my kids, and so raised Catholic, and the teacher said to the class that, and I'm telling you what the teacher said, not what I believe, that the Jews killed Jesus. First off, I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And then, and that they were bad people, and
Wow.
my brother-in-law was Jewish, and I'm like, "Well, let me ask you a question. What do you think about, Glenn?" And that's my brother-in-law. And they're like, "Well, we love Glenn." And I was like, "He's Jewish." They're like, "What? He's not a bad person." I'm like, "Yeah, exactly." I'm like,
Yeah.
so
Jesus.
like when people make, and I said, I'm like, when people make overarching statements like that, they don't know what they're talking about. I said, it's almost never true. I said, and something like this is just hateful. And I said, so we went on, and at one point, I've done this in a blog. I've done a lot of things wrong as a parent, but almost all my kids have thanked me for always asking questions about what they heard or what they read, and to go and find out more information, more context. And if I've done anything good as a parent, it's that. And I don't know where I picked that up, but it was always an important thing to me. And I really do feel like, back to the kids these days, that we're losing a lot of that, because they live in these, I don't even know how long TikToks are, but 30 to 60-minute segments that form the
Seconds.
basis, seconds, yeah,
Yeah.
that form the basis of their arguments, and they're losing all of that context. And that's concerning, to say the least.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I spend tons of time, even with, I've got a daughter who's 22, and every once in a while I've got to be like, hey, look, I know you saw it on the internet, but, check the sources. And she's
Yeah.
pretty good about it. And, she's quick to find a cause to champion. And so she'll see something, it doesn't even matter what the subject matter is. She'll see something and it'll just set her off. And I'll be like, okay, I understand that. But like you just said earlier, let's check the context of this before, you begin your letter writing campaign,
Yeah.
and I love her because, she wears her heart on her sleeve, and she cares about people as opposed to institutions. And she is willing, just as you said, to question. It doesn't matter what party it is. It doesn't matter, what position of authority somebody has. She does tend to question those things for the most part. But every once in a while, she'll be like, I saw this, and did you see that? And I'll be like, all right, let's back up and let's make sure all of this is accurate first.
Right.
And that's the problem with the internet in general, of course.
Exactly. All right. Well, now that we've informed everyone on how to be better parents,
Yes, I think we've improved everybody as a parent.
yes, we may even switch the theme of this podcast to parenting advice based on how well that went. So, third parent in. There you go. All right. Why don't we move on to our first of several segments we like to do on each episode? Unknown unknowns. Because I love the unknown. I love the unknown. Where Tom and I will recommend bands or movies or TV shows that we feel are almost to the level of criminally unknown. Most of these have been bands, and this one is as well. Pretty sure I've recommended some of their songs. I know I've put them on playlists for you, Tom.
You have.
But I have not had the opportunity to highlight them in this segment, which is what I'm going to do today. And the band is called The Roadside Graves. They are out of Metuchen, New Jersey. I know from the fact that I tend to research bands a little too much. They work, at least one of the lead singers works as a high school or, a below college level teacher. Always got the impression that their road schedule revolved around his teaching. And it sort of highlights I think I maybe even talked about this in another blog that I've always assumed if you're a rock band or folk band and you have a couple albums out there, you're doing pretty well. And I'm not sure that's always the case. The Roadside Graves have 141 followers on YouTube Music, with me being one of them, proud follower. They've their latest album is just from a couple years ago. It's 2023's "I Won't Cry Alone," and I think I've talked about this before, but they did an album in 2011 called "We Can Take Care of Ourselves," which was basically it wasn't quite a concept album, but it was inspired by The Outsiders, teenage novel from I guess back in the 60s or 70s. I know we read it when we were growing up, made into a movie and all that other stuff. And I Won't Cry Alone was a sort of a follow-up because it was inspired by Rumblefish, which was a follow-up to The Outsiders. And both of those albums are really strong. They sort of have a Americana. They have two lead singers. When the two of them, they will take turns singing songs, and there are times when they will both sing together. There's a song that I know I put on one of our playlists called Reno, the Sundowner is Closed, I
Mhm.
think is what the title is.
Yep.
It's basically about a guy who's lost his wife, I think, or girlfriend, and he's trying to move on. And he's found another woman that he's hanging out with, and he's just having a really good time. And like at one point, a bartender says, "Do you know who that is?" And he's like, "Nope," and I don't want to know. He's hanging out with her, having fun, and trying to figure out how to move on. And then they have some references because a lot of their songs are around casinos, probably because in New Jersey there's Atlantic City.
Mm.
And there's this part where both of the singers, their voices come together, singing about it's like aces over eights or something. I can't remember that, but it's one of the most beautiful harmonizing moments that from this band. And they have several of those, and they're well worth listening. But my favorite album also has one of my favorite titles, which is "If Shacking Up Is All You Want to Do." Couple great songs, which includes the song I just mentioned, another one called Winter in Tennessee, and then my favorite title of a song ever. And YouTube and Spotify and them sometimes get these titles wrong. I've seen the title listed as "I shit on the roof every time it rains," but I think it's actually supposed to be "shit on the roof every time it rains."
That seems like
Um,
two very different things.
yes, it does. And I've never seen the latter one, but I've seen it lately. I think it's a mistake. I think it's without the I. Because as crazy drunk as we would sometimes get, I can't remember ever wanting to shit on the roof. So
No, no, that's never crossed my mind.
uh, check out that song because it to me it's almost like a lost Graham Parsons or Flying Burrito Brothers song. And there's not all over the place, but they have their sound has changed over the years. There's times when they sound just like a classic Americana band. There's other times where they're a little more rockin'. And maybe that's one of the problems with them catching on to an audience is, they haven't dialed into a singular sound. But I've liked just about everything they've put out. They're great songwriters. It's hard for me to think of how unappreciated they are with only 141 total followers on YouTube Music when you have other artists who have literally millions or even thousands. I mean, we're well below that. So my unknown is the Roadside Grapes.
Yeah, I think it's a good choice for unknown unknowns, but I was shocked when I saw that number of followers because I feel like and I'm not a fan of the band. I think we've talked about it before. I'm
Yep.
not sure we've talked about it when we were recording, but for me, musically, they're a little murky, is kind of a weird word to use, but I don't love I think the lyrics are good, but it's hard to hear sometimes, and
Yeah.
I don't quite like them musically as much as some other Americana bands. But I thought they were much more popular than that because I feel like there was a song of theirs that was getting regular play on Outlaw Country on Sirius or somewhere where I was hearing them. And it may just be that they've been on playlists that you sent me, and that's what I happen to be listening to a lot. But I'm shocked that the numbers are that low, and I agree that they're certainly more talented than a lot of performers that get a lot more followers than them.
Yeah, and I would guess it's probably the latter that I've put them on enough playlists
Maybe that's
because,
what it is.
and I agree. And the murky is there's times, like I said, I don't always do a fantastic job of describing a band's sound or they sound like this, but I think they have a fairly unique sound. Murky, I think, sort of gets at what I'm getting at is always, you usually be able to identify the voices, but you won't always be like, oh, that's a Roadside Grave song. I mean, and that's sometimes
Yeah.
what a band needs to get in
Yeah.
touch with a larger audience.
Our next segment is our recommendations. This season, we are making recommendations from the decade of the 90s. This is our fifth episode of the season, and these recommendations are from 1995. So we each tried to pick something in pop culture that we thought you should go back and revisit from 1995. And my selection is the album Trace by Sun Volt. Sun Volt is the band led by Jay Farrar, who was one half of Uncle Tupelo, who, as regular listeners to this show know, is a touchstone for both of us. I think Trace is their best album. The third song in of the album Trace is Tear Stained Eye, and that is one of my top five songs ever. I absolutely love this album, but I listen to Tear Stained Eye at least once a month just on principle. I love the song. It captures the great lyrics that Farrar writes for his music and captures his very unusual sound, and the voice he has both as a writer and as a vocalist is really highlighted in that song. I love the song Tear Stained Eye, but I got to say, I think that the album Trace may have the best first six songs of an album I've ever heard. It goes Windfall, Live Free, Tear Stained Eye, Route, 10-Second News, and Drown. The next song, and I didn't write it down, is actually really good. But compared to those first six songs, I've never heard an album just start with song after song after song that you just want to listen to and then repeat and listen to again. It is a fantastic album. I like Sun Volt as a band. They continue to perform, although it's really just kind of a Jay Farrar vanity project at this point. But I did just go see them play live about a year and a half ago in a real small venue, and it was fantastic. And in fact, what they did at the show was they played every song from Trace in order of the album, and I was just in heaven. So my recommendation from 1995 is the album Trace by Sun Volt.
Great choice. I can't add or disagree with anything that you said, including the third song and being one of the greatest songs ever. And it's funny because I looked and I almost chose Wilco's AM from
Yes.
the same year because also a great album. But at the time, so I was really bummed out when Uncle Tupelo broke up. It's sort of
Yep.
funny, these ways that you find things out. I don't think the internet was still, it may have existed, but it wasn't where you went and got all your source. And I picked up a Rolling Stone magazine at a store, was leafing through, and in the front where they had a little blurbs, it indicated that they broke up, and I was devastated
Mm.
and hoping it was wrong, but it wasn't. And then when they both came out with albums within probably a couple weeks of each other, I don't know why, but I wanted Sun Volt to emerge as the better, more important artist. And when those two albums came out, I was convinced that they were going to.
Yeah, me
But
too.
that's not how history went. I think that this is different than Roadside Graves. Interestingly enough, I think that some of it is the limit with Farrar's voice. Like I love his voice so much, but he would have to write such different sounding music to get past the fact that his voice is so distinctive.
Yep,
And it's
that's a
not
good
that,
point.
yeah, and it's not that, why am I blanking on his name?
Jeff Tweedy.
Yeah, Jeff Tweedy's voice isn't distinctive, but he has written like his range of songs and how Wilco has evolved has been really, really impressive. I think history will show that they emerged as the more important half of Uncle Tupelo after all that happened.
Yeah, certainly the more popular and the, I guess, more longevity, although they've had their own, twists and turns of the band. My guess is that both of those guys are somewhat difficult to work with. But,
Yeah.
anecdotally, Jay Farrar is really a pain in the ass to work with. And Jeff Tweedy is just sometimes a pain in the ass. That's the indication I think we've gotten. And I like the album Wilco, but I wouldn't put it in my top 10 of all time. I think I might put Trace in my top 10 albums of all time.
All right. I originally had a very different choice for my 1995 selection. I'll pull a Tom and I'll say that I was going to go with the Presidents of the United States of America, which was a very, very popular album. Their first one opened up with the song Kitty. I won't get into it because then I'd totally pull a Tom, but I was
Hey.
going to tie it into the fact that it was sort of like kids' music put on an adult album, which ties in, of course, to our Parenthood theme. But then Tom said something as I was driving in this morning, and I was like, oh shit, let me look real quick for one of these Disney movies that came out. And I did a quick
Uh,
search, and Toy Story came out in 1995. And I am certain that I saw it at the movie theater, but it doesn't line up with the age of my kids. But I also remember thinking, I'm not going to enjoy this at all. Like, so there was, I don't know what it was. It must have been out for a while. My daughter wasn't born until 1997. It came out in 95. And if I took her to a movie theater, it would have been at least another year or two afterwards. It would have been kind of dumb of me to take a newborn to the movie theater. And I remember going and watching that movie and immediately being, that was freaking awesome. Like it was such a great, works at the adult level, works at the kid level. And to me, that is the key to these movies because there's other ones you and I have talked about. I think your daughter watched them too, like Hercules and Mulan. Not that they're not great movies, and they certainly have some adult humor in them, but they seem to feel a little more cartoonish and operate at that level. But I'd still sit there and watch them over and over and over again with my daughter and my sons. Toy Story appealed at both levels as well as any movie I've seen, and Pixar has continued that theme for years now, with some being more successful than others. But Toy Story set a really high bar, and again, you know, it's not going to be a surprise to anyone, but I couldn't pass up on something that ties in so nicely to our theme of parenthood and our willingness to watch kids' movies when our kids aren't even around.
Next up is Post Facto.
It's a mistake. It's a mistake.
Post Facto is where we correct any errors from earlier episodes, flesh out earlier ideas or information that we didn't necessarily have at our fingertips in earlier episodes. And for once, Chris has something to report in Post Facto.
I do. It's not a mistake, and I read it in 3 days, but I read a book that I referenced on here. I didn't really make it as a choice, but I referenced as a staff pick when I chose a song by a band that the author of this book is also in. But the book is called The Horse by Willie Vlotton, the former lead singer of Richmond Fontaine, and now the bass player and major songwriter for the band The D-Lines. And I'd seen it referenced somewhere, and I sent it to Tom. I got sick, so I didn't have anything else to do, and I read it in just a couple sittings. And it's a Willie Vlotton book. It's really, really good, and it's not depressing because in the end it ends up being a somewhat uplifting. But what's most interesting and why I think, Tom, you would probably appreciate it is it's all about songwriting and bands. There's some references to fictional bands that make me think of bands that we've listened to over the years. Like there's one called the Sanchez Brothers that I'm sure is alluding to Rank and File, which was an Alejandro Escovedo band. And it's just this guy's life he's now living in an abandoned mine, or near an abandoned mine up in the mountains by himself. And this horse, who is blind, and in really bad shape, just shows up, and he doesn't know what to do. He thinks he should probably just kill it because it doesn't have much of a chance to live. And so it starts with that, and then from there, and him trying to figure out what he should do. He has all these flashbacks to his career as a songwriter and a musician, all out in the Reno area, which is where Willie Vlotton writes a lot of his songs about. But it's not dark, because I don't know that Willie Vlotton has like dark people who are doing like purposefully bad things. There's a darkness in the atmosphere where it's like people just don't make good decisions, and they're stuck in this life of, it's not nothingness, but it's such a small, contained world where it feels like these characters could have had so many more opportunities if they had made other choices. And that seems to be a theme in Willie Vlotton's songs and in his books. And there's a shitload of drinking too. It's like I told you, Tom, if you think you drink too much, read this book, because it'll make you realize that you could drink a whole lot more.
You could set some goals.
like him and a buddy are driving through the snow, and as they're going, and the buddy seems like a perfectly normal dude. As they're going, they're taking swigs of tequila. It's like, oh God, you guys are killing me. But in the end, a very good story. If you like music, if you're into songwriting, I think you would like it. If you're okay with the sort of darkish world that Willie Vlotton creates as well as anyone, I would definitely encourage you to check it out.
Yep, it is on my wish list on Goodreads as we speak. So I'm looking forward to it. My post facto contribution for this episode is some listener feedback. In our Jumping the Shark episode, I recommended a novel called The Ministry of Time as a staff pick, speaking of previous staff picks. And then I think in a subsequent episode, I recommended even more after I finished the book, because I was not completely finished when I mentioned it as a staff pick. I stand by that recommendation, but we did get a response from a regular listener, and all I can do is quote it. It says, with respect to The Ministry of Time, it says, "It sounds like Tom just recommended the book version of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure." And God damn it, if that isn't pretty fucking accurate. So I'd say there are a few differences. There's no Abraham Lincoln, first of all, and no Socrates. But I thought that was really funny, and I had to admit it was pretty much head on. So I appreciate the feedback. Please let us know what you think about any of our staff picks or recommendations, any of that stuff. You can always email us at thirdsongin@gmail.com with any of that kind of response or feedback. So that is a nice segue into our next segment, which is staff picks.
Just around the corner from you.
Staff picks are where Tom and I try to recreate the experience of going into the old record stores or video stores and checking out the board where staff from those establishments would list their picks, their recommendations of new material that just came out. Tom and I will provide recommendations of new material, newish material, whether it be a book, TV show, album, or song. And Tom, why don't you start us off this week?
All right. My staff pick for this week is an album that just came out earlier in 2025 called Mississippi Unplugged by a Texas singer-songwriter named Jason Eady. He had escaped me. I was not aware of him as an artist. Have you heard of Jason Eady? Have you listened to any of his stuff?
I've heard of his name, but I can't say that I have any of his music favorited, so I don't think I've listened to too much of it.
I believe that the recommendation to me might have come from my brother, but somehow it found its way to me. And he's been around since about 2005. And I counted, he's got 11 albums out. It seems like a guy, particularly based upon his voice, his singing, his songwriting. I'm not sure how he got past me, but I want to recommend Mississippi Unplugged, which is an unplugged acoustic kind of back porch version of a 2023 album he put out called Mississippi. I've listened to both of them. The 2023 album, frankly, I will recommend equally. It's not brand new or anything like that. That one's with a full band. He's very much a Texas kind of country blues singer. There's a Muscle Shoals feel to a lot of the music. It's a little funky at times, particularly the 2023 album. The unplugged one, as I said, feels more like he's sitting on his back porch with his guitar and just singing really cool versions of these earlier recorded songs. I couldn't figure out who his voice reminded me of. It's kind of smooth, but it's got a little bit of a twang to it. When I researched him before this episode on Wikipedia, I found out that he has collaborated with the guy I think he kind of sounds like, which is Kevin Welch. So he's been involved in Kevin Welch's last 3 albums. We were just talking about Kevin Welch when we were interviewing Brent James for an episode, and Brent has a personal relationship and contact with Kevin Welch, and we all raved about how much we like his music. Well, that's what this guy reminds me of. It's kind of got that Western beat feel to it, and I'm going to listen to it a lot more. I just kind of came across Mississippi Unplugged about a week or so ago, and then backtracked to the 2023 album, but he's got a whole bunch of others, and I'm really interested to hear what they sound like. But for this episode, I recommend Mississippi Unplugged, which just came out in 2025 by Jason Eady, E-A-D-Y.
Very cool. I will check him out. Like I said, I know the name and I'm not sure how or why, but how you described it sounds like someone I would definitely want to listen to.
Yeah, I'm surprised that neither of us had come across him or recommended him in the past, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. So Tom and I have committed to having an episode about Canada. We're going to do it, if for no other reason than we need to create some friendliness between us and Canada for when we move there, which may happen sometime within the next 4 years. Not making any sort of political statement there. That 4 years could be referring to anything.
It could. Anything at all.
Anything at all. But my choice is a Canadian band that I think is kind of popular in Canada. They're called the Bluestones. They are coming out with a new album, and as is the thing to do these days, they're releasing singles every couple weeks apart. And the latest one that they released is called Come Apart. They're a rockin' upbeat band, which might surprise. They have very few, if any. I've not really found any sort of ballads or anything or any slow, depressing shit that would usually typify my listening habits, which makes me think that I would kind of like it up in Canada because I like these. I like what they have to offer, and
A little optimism, right?
a little optimism. Although it's funny because I think I didn't mean this to have a parenthood theme, but one of the things that 100% is true about kids these days is this focus on anxiety and mental health challenges, which is good that it's out there. I will say, having worked in higher ed, I think I was right in the middle of the explosion of kids identifying with challenges that might make it difficult for them to succeed, because every college seems to have a program where students in that situation can register early. And I remember when I was at UNC, it went from, a relatively low number, less than 100, to hundreds of students in just a couple years, and that trend has continued. And I have found that some of the newer artists are definitely very open and explicit in talking about their mental health challenges, which also is good, I suppose. But I will say at times it's sometimes a little uncomfortable, and that's just me, not anybody else. And this song has a little bit of that. I mean, the opening line is, "I'm holding out for a day without a cringe attack." But then I scroll through my feed and get the feeling my generational trauma is I don't give a shit. I can't connect anymore. I don't see the point. So a little bit of
I'm going to take back that optimism thing I just mentioned.
Exactly. That's why I read it, because I was like, well, maybe it's not.
It's upbeat music, but
Yep. And then this one ties in with my last couple of days. I come apart, woke up with a headache. I come apart. I don't know how I'm going to get to work today. I come apart. Blah, blah, blah. So that's the that's the theme of this song. It's very, like I said, it's rocking and upbeat, as is the style of the Blue Stones. And that's my staff pick for the week. And expect more from Canada over the coming episodes.
Absolutely. Our next segment is our playlist picks. For every season of Third Song In, we create a playlist. It's typically around 10 songs or so. Each of us picks a song per episode. I'm sorry, it's usually around 20 songs or so. We each pick a song that we feel relates in some way or fashion to the theme of the episode. And then we add it to a playlist, which we then publish on Spotify, on Amazon Music, Apple Music, and YouTube Music for you to hear. What's your playlist pick for this episode?
I went with one of my favorite bands of all time, the Subdudes, and their song Sugar Pie from Annunciation, which is 1994 release for that band. But it's all about kids growing older and moving away and not seeing them every day, and remembering the sugar pie is what he used to call his, I think, daughter. And I will go back to my penchant for reading lyrics. And the last verse is, and now time has passed and you're so far away. Can't get used to not seeing you each day, but there's one place in the back of my mind where I can go to see you anytime. And for you to me, forever you will be my sugar pie, sit by me. And then they continue that sugar pie out to the end of the song. It's just a sweet, perfect song for an episode about parenthood. It's my daughter's favorite song from the Subdudes. And I went and saw them, and she asked me if I'd go get an autograph for her and tell them that her favorite song was Sugar Pie. And I was actually able to do that, and we got to go backstage at this really small club, talk to the band, and told them. And
That's
I thought
cool.
I thought they were impressed that I asked for an autograph for my daughter versus being some geek. Which
Right.
I was
Yeah.
geeked out to be talking to him, but I did get the autograph for her, gave it to her, and I'm hoping that she still has it to this day.
My choice for the playlist is very similar in tone and concept. I'm picking the song Letting You Go by Jason Isbell and the 400 Unit from their album Reunions in 2020. It's the song that will almost make me cry every time I listen to it. It's Isbell singing to his, I think at that time, infant daughter, but certainly his daughter was no more than a couple years old. And it's funny because you were talking at the beginning of the episode about driving home with your daughter after she was born and thinking, what the hell do I do next? And in terms of lyrics, the very first verse reads, the nurse helped us buckle the seat in the car and they sent us on our way. I drove home so slow. We had no instructions. The first days were hard, but there's things about babies a woman just knows. And so it starts with the birth of your daughter. If you have a daughter, it's hard not to cry right at the beginning of that fucking song. But then it basically is a song about him eventually walking his daughter down the aisle. So he's looking to the future. And it is a beautiful song. When my daughter graduated from high school, I put together a video. I found a bunch of old photos and video, and I cut it all together, and I put it. I edited it together with this song, and made my wife burst into tears within like 3 seconds. It was awesome. But it is a beautiful song, as are most of Isbell's songs. It absolutely is about your kids, inevitably growing older and moving away. Third Song In is recorded in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and Joliet, Illinois. You can reach us by email at thirdsongin@gmail.com. Please follow us wherever you listen to your podcast, rate and review us, give us all of your stars. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and YouTube Music.
You can also check us out on our website, thirdsonginpodcast.com, which we just renewed for another year. So hang out with us for at least another year. On our website, we'll have links to all the episodes, as well as all of our recommendations, our staff picks, our unknown unknowns. You can also have direct access to our blogs. You've been listening to Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Thanks for listening.
Empty sound and space. I would not be good at this by myself. We are the
Crazy
boys in
ass
the
idea.
chorus. We hope you liked our show. We know you're rooting for us, but now we have to go.